All right, hello everybody. Right now, we are going to use gouache paint to practice painting bones. I feel like it's a great technique on toned paper, and we're going to go through a couple applications of this for nature journaling or nature sketching or even the study of anatomy. Painting bones, drawing bones is a great way to study them, and it does seem like gouache is a really good technique on toned paper to make it work. So we're going to dive right into it. I will show you a few examples. Get your materials ready. If you have gouache, even if it's just a little bit of white gouache, that will be great. And colored pencils could also work well. If you have toned paper, that's good. If you don't have toned paper, that's okay also, but toned paper is ideal. It definitely helps with some of the visual effect that I'm going to be talking about. And because one of the problems about drawing bones is it's a white subject, and normally we're working on white paper. So drawing white things on white paper, especially if watercolor is your main media, which it is for a lot of nature journalists and sketchers, drawing white things on white paper with watercolor is going to be a little bit challenging. So one thing I often do in my regular sketchbook that has regular white paper is I will put a pocket, and in that pocket I will put some toned paper. That way if I need it, I can access it. And another thing, if you're working in the studio, get your blow dryer ready because that can be really useful. And I have found that gouache, for me at least, was a lot easier once I started using traditional brushes, which is sort of unorthodox for me to say that, and this big, huge, messy ceramic palette. For some reason, those things were helpful for unlocking gouache, at least a little bit. I feel like I'm still challenged by gouache, but you can see I've been using it a lot more lately, especially for bones. So let's get into the topic of bones. Here you can see some sketches that I did during a class. So this was a class online, much like what you're joining in on right now. And you can see all of these drawings of bones, all of these notes and everything were from a class online. And it's important when it is a class online to make a note of that. So here you can see my note. It shows like a little laptop. That's the icon I use so that I know that these bones were all drawn from things that I saw online. They weren't bones that I had with me. So if you're taking notes and following along and sketching with this episode, then you should also probably make some type of note such as that, so you know it wasn't things that you saw in the field. And I do have some photos that we're going to work from, and I will dive right into it here in 1 second. Let me find a good page. Here are some wolf sketches that I did in gouache. Another good example of the metadata being important. Okay, I think we're gonna go straight into, yeah, we're gonna go straight into here. So, let me find a new page. I'm gonna get a two-page spread open like this, and I am going to start the slideshow, and we can work on this together. If you have toned paper, get it out. If you have any type of colored pencils in a pale value, get those out. I'm actually using watercolor pencil. You could just use graphite as well, or you could use a gray ink pen. All of these would be for the underdrawing. A Tombow pen would be good as well, the water-soluble ones, the most common Tombow pens. I don't have any of those right now, but that could work as well. If you have a ruler, get that. And also, if you have a compass, get that. Creative Arts with Horrific. Glad you think it's fire. Hey, James. I have not used that brand of acrylic gouache before. I actually haven't heard of that brand of acrylic wash. I have tried some other acrylic washes and was not that impressed. I think that if I'm going to use gouache, I'm just going to use regular gouache. And if I'm going to use acrylic, I'm going to use acrylic paint. I think acrylic gouache is kind of like a weird in between. Maybe sometimes white acrylic gouache if you just need something in your kit that can put down a lot of white. In that case, I would use it there. Oh, okay. That word is just a typo. Yeah, I would say if you want to experiment with gouache, just experiment with regular gouache. I use whole bean. I would say the first thing to do would just be to buy like a thing of white gouache. Don't even get any other ones, any other colors. Just get a permanent white gouache, and you can mix that with your other watercolors and get a lot of colors. So just starting with white would be the best way to go. All right, thanks for clarifying that, James. Okay, gonna keep going here and dive in. So I'll leave that gouache there. That's the whole bean gouache that I use currently. Now I'm just gonna make a little bit of like a frame on my page with my pale pencil. There is a trick for using your hand as sort of a jig that allows you to draw these lines kind of perfectly in alignment with the edges of the page. It's almost like using a straight edge. And a lot of this is not going to show up very much on the camera, but it's a fun sort of underdrawing thing that I've been getting into and kind of enjoying is this pink colored pencil on toned paper. And you can see this one was one I had forever, and it's just a fun drawing tool. Now I'm not going to explain too much about this because this is actually sort of a top secret page composition thing that I'm working on. But we will use this later for something less esoteric. And if you have a compass, get it out. I think it's something that people used to use a lot for drawing, and we don't that much anymore. And they're actually really fun. And this one was like 60 cents at a whatchamacallit, a thrift store. So there you have it. Okay, now I'm going to switch to slideshow mode, and we're going to look at bones together and start drawing them. So get ready. I hope you are ready. Okay, so pretend you're out walking in the forest, and we're going to look at this from a real life perspective. I do think and you know, I had this bone here, but it's just a weird extraterrestrial bone, so we're not going to draw this bone today, but this is the only bone that I actually have with me. So unfortunately, we are going to draw from photos, but like I showed you before, you can make some pretty cool bone drawings on toned paper, even if you're just attending a class like you are right now. So those ones that I showed you before, all of these were done from video. But if you can find bones on your own, that would be even better. So say you were out on a hike and you came across this bone. You could take a picture of it and then draw it later, which is basically what we're going to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm either going to use a colored pencil or a graphite pencil for the underdrawing. This is very different from what I normally do if you know me, and if I were in the field, I might do it slightly differently. But for right now, I'm in the studio, so I'm just going to make the most of it and use a slightly maybe slower process. Is that it? It looks like, and if you can't see something, don't guess too much. Let's keep it pretty loose, and you can always try multiple iterations. You don't have to commit to the first drawing. I went really big with that first drawing, but maybe I should have done something smaller. I'll even do one in ink to show that if I were in the field, what it would probably look like. I think I see something there, but I'm not sure. This is where the direct observation would be a lot better. I'll just draw a question mark. And so now I'll show you what one would look like straight in ink, because you probably can't see. This is one of the benefits of using ink, especially when you make videos online. I will switch I believe I can switch there you go. So this way you can see it a little bit bigger, what I'm up to. So now I'm going to pretend like I am out there in the field and just need to do a really quick one, and I see there's this different texture here. I want to get that. And I'm not even going to notice that little detail that I'm unsure about. I'm going to go up here and make that big opening, and that's about it. That would be my sketch of that same bone in the field if I were using ink. And that, of course, is the infamous, loved and hated Fude de Manin from Sailor. Okay, now I'm going to look at adding a little bit more info maybe with the colored pencil, or I might be almost ready to just get some gouache down. And there's a couple ways we can do it with the gouache. And what I'm gonna use is I'm gonna use this big mixing palette, which was one of the things that seemed to, maybe these two things are only correlated and not causally related, but it seems like starting to use traditional brushes, which is really unheard of for me. I've used these Aquash water reservoir water brushes for a decade without hardly anything else, but these traditional brushes do seem like for gouache sometimes to come in handy, and this big mixing palette. Those were some of the things that helped me sort of start to feel a little bit better with gouache, because I was challenged for a long time with it. If you have, for example, a John Muir Laws watercolor palette, which maybe some of you watching have, this has a bunch of watercolor, and then it just has one area here for white gouache. In theory, you could do almost everything that I'm gonna do right now with just white gouache and your watercolors. You have over 30 colors in here. Even if you don't have the John Muir Laws palette, you could just have white gouache and then everything else be watercolor, and you can mix these pigments. All of these watercolors can be mixed with white gouache to create a variety of colors. However, if you want to, you can get different colors of gouache. They do sell them in different colors, and for me, experimenting with it, it really helped getting some colors that weren't primary colors. At first, I was trying to mix everything from primary colors, and my gouache looked very bad. Now I have a few other colors, but I definitely wouldn't want to just buy hundreds of these different colors. I feel like gouache is harder to mix precise colors than it is with just regular watercolor, a watercolor palette. So that being said, luckily bones, as you can see, do not have that many colors. So the main color that we need is white. I'm also going to be using a little spray bottle like this, and that way I can not waste. If this were acrylic gouache, so people have asked about acrylic gouache. If this were acrylic gouache, all of these remnants of paint that I didn't use from my last painting session, which was yesterday, or maybe in some cases this morning, that would just be like plastic trash. It dries up and it becomes plastic. So acrylic gouache is basically the same as acrylic paint. It's plastic. Acrylic is a type of plastic. And so when it dries up completely, it's not usable again. With regular gouache, it can be reactivated, and that's bad in some cases if you're trying to do a complex layered painting like the Mona Lisa. But if you aren't perfect at measuring out your paint, and you don't want it to all dry up into microplastic to go into the environment, then this regular gouache is a lot better because you can re-wet it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking an old thing of white. Instead of squeezing out a bunch of new white, I'm using an old blob, monolith, whatever you want to call it, of white here. and I'm going to start with that. I'm going to use a really big brush at first, but I'll show a couple different ways to do this. One thing I like to do is always have a paper towel nearby to sort of control the amount of water, because what you're going to see is one of the most important things here is controlling how much gouache you have on the brush, how much gouache to water ratio, and then how loaded is your brush, because there's going to be a couple techniques that will be determined by that. So sometimes having like a thin gouache and using it almost as watercolor is useful. Sometimes having a thick gouache and using it as the opaque option that it really is, almost like acrylic. Sometimes that's great, and sometimes using a dry brush is great. So here you can see I used it almost like I would use acrylic in some sort of industrial painting situation. I basically created a completely even, or as close as possible, an even wash, and this whole thing is basically one color. Now down here, I'm going to dry my brush out a little bit, and what I'm going to show you is that with a little bit of dry brush, I could just come in here and hit the highlights maybe on this bone and leave the rest to draw in with graphite, for example, or ink even, it could be, or with another color of gouache. Also remembering that sometimes it's good practice to see what it's like to leave the toned paper underneath. You don't need to get everything. We could also come in here with a mid-tone. You can see I'm already defaulting to going with the lightest tones first, which is a habit I learned from watercolor. In theory, with gouache, you can work from the darkest to the lightest, which we can try with this drawing here and see how it goes. So good thing I have a couple drawings going at the same time. Now I've mixed sort of a yellowish color to maybe add some weathering on some parts of this bone. We have to be careful with this sort of in-between tone because it could be the same as the paper and it might be redundant and less elegant. If something's redundant and elegant, that's fine in my opinion, but if it's redundant and not elegant, then that's more questionable. Okay, so I said I was going to start with dark on that one. I have some purple already mixed up in my palette here, some residual purple. So I'm going to see what I can do with that. And on this bone, I'm going to experiment starting dark and working light. And since this journal is a learning tool as well, I'm going to take notes. Whole bean gouache would be important to know. The fact that I'm doing some testing. And then this one's going to say light to dark. And then this one's going to say dark to light. So far, we've been talking a lot about the techniques and not so much about how to analyze the bones. So let's ameliorate that and look a little bit at some more bones and maybe we can do some quicker sketches and think less about the painting stuff. Let me know if you have any questions. This is live, at least it is right now. So, okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide here. And it is important to practice drawing and sketching, things that you might find in the field. Like if you live in North America, a lot of this stuff is from North America. These are things that you could find in the field and draw these. Oh wait, maybe not that one. But let's go here, and there's a couple interesting things we can look at here from a biomechanics perspective. And if you live in North America, this is a likely thing to find. There's also related species and related taxa in a lot of parts of the world. So the cool thing here is we're going to get to use our goniometer for measuring angles. You can also use a compass for measuring angles, which is something I would like to practice more, but I'm not going to do it right now in front of a live audience. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my pink watercolor pencil here and just kind of eyeball this angle. And if I were there in real life, or even with a photo, I can hold up a goniometer and measure what the actual angle is. So for example, for the one that I have drawn here, I have to decide where 0 is going to be. But if this were 0 along the plane of this bottom part, I'm going to call it the bottom part of the leg there. If that were 0, I could take my goniometer all the way up to that upper part of the leg. And let's see, if I'm starting at 0, I would go up to about, it looks like about 75 degrees to me. So I'm going to write 75-degree angle with the wavy lines that mean an approximate. It's an approximately 75-degree angle. Is that possible? So what would a 45-degree? Because of construction, people are 45-degree angle. Okay, starting from 0, going up to, that would be a 45-degree angle right there. Nope, it's definitely not. Okay, cool. Anyways, so this is just getting in sort of trying to think about the angles, which can be important on a lot of these animals, especially if you're interested in the biomechanics. Now I'm going to get a closer look at what I can see here and start with a little bit of an outline, even though Leonardo da Vinci famously said that nothing in nature has a line around it, which is very important thing to think about, not just for drawing. I think even more importantly than for drawing and art is just the sort of metaphorical interpretation that's possible from there. Okay, so this isn't all bone, and hopefully people aren't hopefully this isn't too morbid for most people. If you eat meat, I mean, this is pretty chill, I would say. But there's stuff on here that's not just bone, so that's kind of interesting. And I am going to come in with a really messy mixture, but just because my palette is a little bit messy, there are some chunks. I do like having a small palette knife to work with my gouache, especially once it dries out. It is chalky. It's not as elegant as watercolor, I must say. So now I can see that the color I'm painting is almost the exact. While it's wet, it looks like it's a different value, but I have a feeling this is going to be the exact value of my paper, so that was a completely pointless thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my palette, get a little bit more white, and this is a perfect demonstration of one of the downsides of gouache compared to watercolor is it changes value. It has a value and color shift as it dries that's more pronounced than with watercolor. So things, right now this is wet. In 5 minutes, it's going to be a different color and it's going to be a different value, which can be tricky. Oops, I should have added in a shadow while I was on these ones before. Now I'm just going to add in an imaginary shadow. This is something about painting in gouache that I think is a little bit challenging from it happens with watercolor too, but I think with this it happens even more. And if we're in the studio, we often are sort of bouncing around from one thing to another, and sometimes we're working a lot from imagination. Like I'm no longer looking at this bone anymore, and I'm adding in these dark spots where I think they should be. And so I think there's things you can definitely learn from that, but at the same time, anything that's not based on direct observation, I think can be a little bit a little bit problematic depending on where it goes. But at the same time, I do think there's aspects of that process that use your visual memory and train your visual memory. And I think that's something that artists of the past probably practiced a lot more than artists of today who have Google image search and just infinite images online. Okay. Now, since this one is, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush here actually. And these are very cheap traditional brushes that I got for using gouache. And I got a number 6 round, a number 10 round. And I also find with gouache, it's fun to have a flat like this. And I can't remember what number that is. Shoot, it just rubbed off recently. But it looks like it's about 1 centimeter across, so that's like a little bit less than half an inch. It's probably 3/4 of an inch. Okay, now I'm gonna come in here, and this is the part that's harder, is when you have to be precise with colors. I'm way more precise with my John Muir Laws watercolor palette than I am with gouache. And that's way too dark. I probably have a lot more practice with I definitely have a lot more practice with the regular watercolor than with gouache, but I think that watercolor is easier to mix than gouache. Yes, I think that if you want accurate colors, watercolor is better than gouache. Oh yeah, but I do have this, so. Okay, that drawing kind of sucks, and it actually, let me make it a little bit more dry. Okay, so this might not look like the most beautiful or exotic bone, but these angles here are very interesting, and the way this part of the bone sticks out back here is also very interesting. This allows for tendons to connect to there, and from a biomechanics point of view, is a very cool curve. So what I'm noticing is that in my drawing, it doesn't really show up very much, but this is something that I'm very interested in. So what I'm going to do is I'm either going to use graphite or ink to reinforce it. And I think in this case, just to be quick and dirty, I'm going to just use this Feuille de Monin and get in here and kind of just create a cartoon almost. This is the part that still has fur on it. It also has what looks like the dew claw still has that sort of black, I can't remember if it's keratin. I think it is keratin case. It's almost like a toenail for us. And then it looks like the 2 toes, it's actually bone. So I should have gotten those as white because those, and I'll just make notes of these and start turning this into a diagram. It looked kind of like a face, but these ones have lost those sort of, there's these covers that they have that are basically like toenails. I'll use the word toenails to keep it simple. Lost toenails. And then the dew claw up there has the toenail present. That can also give me a clue on some animals of whether it's a front or a back. But I'm really interested in this part, so let me make sure that that part stands out in my drawing. I can't see too much up there, but I think that part's broken. I think there's some type of joint here, but I can't really see the details in the photo. If I was there in real life, I'd be able to do it more. And now I'm just going to sort of emphasize this. There's a little bit of dried up carnage here that I'm not going to worry about too much. And this looks like a face, which I don't want, but that's basically what I would try to draw in the field. Maybe here I can draw what I would imagine the hooves to look like. And then I do have to remember, I do want to add more white. So I think this is probably dry enough that I can add a little bit more white. And I'll show you a technique where you try to just get almost no water, managing the amount of water. And I think this is why I've been using traditional brushes instead of water brushes, is it seems like with gouache, managing the amount of water you have in the mixture is very important. So if you're coming from watercolor and you're the kind of person that just does lots of happy accidents, lots of wet on wet, you might struggle with gouache, because with gouache you really need to manage the amount of water you have on the brush. And my number one tip for that, and this works for water brushes, these kinds of water brushes as well, but it works even better for traditional brushes, is this trick right here. This is the main trick for managing the amount of water on your brush. So I can see, if I look at this brush closely, that there's a fat drop of water at the bottom, and I definitely want to take that off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the edge of this paper towel. See how I have the paper towel folded? And I'm going to apply it to the top of the brush, not the tip. The part where the bristles go into the, I think the thing's called a ferrule, and I'm just going like this and absorbing water from there. If you practice this, practice it with your water brush too. Practice this over and over again, because I think that this is sort of like being able to change the tires on your bicycle. If you can do this, you can keep your device functioning very highly. And also, maybe it's more nuanced than filling the tires on your bicycle, because it really gives you a lot of control over how much moisture is on that brush. Okay, so we're gonna keep going. It seems like lots of people watching the live signed off when I gave that super pro tip. That's always a bad sign. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now, that I've got my brush a little bit more dry, is I'm gonna try to get some of this white here. So I'm going to get this white, and I barely have any water on my brush because I want to get the purest white possible. Purest in the sense of has the least amount of water, and that will create the strongest highlight. And then I'm just gonna, you have to be very careful about where you put that, and you can use it in sort of a dry brush way that can even cover up some of these black lines. But in a lot of cases, you might want a slightly weaker white, and in that case, you will dip your brush into more water and maybe mix it with one of these other colors. Ideally, like with watercolor, you don't want to have too many values or too many colors. Keeping it sort of simple helps unify it. All right, let's move on. Oh wait, let's put in a little bit of white on that bone there. And I'm just gonna go straight to the extreme highlight. So I'll get a very dry brush just with pure white and put it on the tops there. It looks like part of this has been chewed up on that original bone. I'm gonna go back to the original bone briefly here. That one. And I'm gonna add some little spots here. So you can see that this process is not super linear, and I'm sorry for just randomly jumping back to this one, but sometimes when you have multiple paintings that you're working on at the same time, this is kind of what ends up happening. If you were in the field, it might be a little bit different. In the field, you'd be doing this sort of ADD journaling and sketching as well, but the more ADD part would be because there would be like birds flying over and like snakes, and you'd be with a bunch of other nature nerds that are like shouting about, look, we found these mushrooms over here, and you're trying to just focus on getting one good bone drawing. And obviously I couldn't focus on just getting one good bone drawing. I sort of deflected my perfectionism. Here's a really good, I deflected my perfectionism by doing 3 drawings of that original hip bone. Here's a really good example of, I put the brush down and it was way too wet. So what I need to do is actually suck some of that moisture off of the brush, come back, vacuum a little bit up of that original puddle, and then sort of recalibrate here to do what I initially wanted to do. And there's a hole here, and then that's the, okay, I see. That's not what I thought. This has probably way more contrast than it needs for what's actually happening on this bone. So that one didn't work out great. Maybe I could use this for outline a little bit though. Okay. All right, I think it's time to go to the next bone photo. Here's a good one to measure angles as well. We saw that one already. Here's a different one. Let's look at these really briefly. They're very white too, so these are very, very clean. And let's draw these real quick. A white colored pencil would be very useful right now. I don't have one with me, but that would be cool. I'm going to use instead a pink colored pencil, a pink white, you know, almost the same. And I'm just going to think about, this is not going to be to scale compared to my other ones. I'm going to think about the major shapes there and try to carve them in. That opening there seems interesting. These are some small rodent bones. They're not small bones in terms of the small bones of the body, but they're small compared to other animals. I think these are large bones, or what is it called? Limb bones. I can't remember the technical term. I should remember this, but these are the bones that are sort of the bigger bones, like the humerus, the femur, the all of the arm and leg bones in mammals. Obviously, mammals are the most important because since we're mammals, so I'm just going to go in with pretty white, which maybe is a mistake, but at least I could get a quick sketch of these that will look kind of cool since it's on tone paper. So sometimes you can kind of get this, if you're using white colored pencils or some white gouache on tone paper, you can almost get this like artificial like coolness to your drawing, and you'll be like, oh my God, like I'm an amazing artist. And it might just be the medium. Sometimes the medium can make you look better than you really are. And I speak from personal experience, so I'm not like trying to trash you if you have like a certain medium that you always use, and then you experiment with other ones and realize that you don't actually have like very broad art skills, and maybe it's just that one medium sort of has a way that it pops almost no matter what is drawn. That can happen. So that has happened to me, and I think that gouache on, or colored pencil on tone paper or black paper even more so, can have that effect. But here we are trying to learn mostly. Now let's look at a vertebrae real quick, because I think this will be fun, and then we'll end with one mystery bone. Okay, so this one I'm just going to try to go quickly, sort of like I did the last ones. Those rodent bones went really fast, and I think that's how it can be in the field, and you can actually get a fair amount of information, or you can at least just learn these things better. I'm going to put a basic sort of outline here to get the curve, and then I'm going to get more in detail here. Wider there. This one also is sort of wider. Uh-oh, I might not even be able to fit all of them, so that's pretty bad. Let me just draw another smaller one here. Draw an outline of where it should fit. See if I can, I'll measure them out this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So I measured them out this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, plus this little thing on the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, good. A little thing on the end. This one comes in. This one. There's some negative space here. More negative space. Oops, I'm not fitting in enough negative space. But they're getting narrower towards the front, so that's good. Hopefully you can even see my pink pencil. Why do I suddenly like the pink pencil? Maybe it allows me to be more tentative, feel more subtle. But look, this one's already way more accurate than the first one. Hopefully you can see that. It might be too small. Here you go. Oh, Christine Elder, I wasn't even thinking about the spookiness. That's a good point. I kind of just chose randomly, or I thought so. Oh, we should do a really spooky one. I think one year I did do some cucurbita squashes and pumpkins during the holidays. Okay, so that one is way more accurate, and we're gonna stick to the sort of fast theme here. So what I'm really gonna try to do is see, okay, let's make this look like the bones. Let's make this, you know, work as a way for me to learn about these bones, but let's also do it in a way that's pretty fast and pretty low bar. Like this, you don't need to feel super confident as an artist to just try this. And what I'm doing is I've got this pink in already, and so I'm trying to just fill in the places that I think are going to be the brightest white on that vertebrae. Ooh, wow, I'm really liking how this vertebrae looks. There's something about them. Oh, and there should be dark segments in between, so I kind of messed that up. And there's also these little arm things that come out. Those seem pretty important. They look kind of like something inappropriate going on here in these, the way these vertebrae are all lined up. They've definitely got some kind of chain going on there. That's all I can say on YouTube. But anyways, there was these little, let's call them arm things that are coming out of one, and they look like they're going into the one in front of them. So anyways, this is probably something that helps keep your vertebrae all connected. So it's definitely PG-13. And so one of the things you can do is you can tweak around a little bit more with gouache than watercolor and getting these sort of subtle differences in the values. And there's two ways you can do that. One way is to get the white down and then later spread from there and sort of reactivate it and smudge it around. The other way would be to start from really pale versions of that white. So that's too pale to see. But if I started with pale versions and then built those versions up little by little. So this is the disciplined way of doing it. If you don't think you're a disciplined painter, then that might not be the way for you. But those, just to sort of show here, That would be like level 1, level 2, level 3, and you could build those up little by little. Or you could just go straight to sort of level 3, and then once it is dry, or mostly dry, or even, guess while it's wet, you could come in here and sort of try to shade out that edge. If you want to be disciplined and precise, use this method, which is basically the same as watercolor. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of darks to that one and get ready to wrap this up. Let's see, what other bones do we have? One last bone, actually. I'll get some, whoa, that's way too dark. Get a little bit of dark in here. Ta-da-da. And then we'll go to the next bone. Hopefully I have space. Oh my god. Okay, this is a really good one because people find these all the time and think they're skulls. So let's just nature journal it and draw it because lots of people think they're skulls and they're not skulls. And drawing it might help you realize that. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm just gonna try to get the basic the basic geometry there with this color pencil that I've been using. And I see a sort of, I'm going to make it really small. This looks like it could be the top of the brain case, right? But it's actually from birds. A lot of people will mistake this part of the bird. I think it's the bird hip or the bird pelvis. Yeah, I think it's the bird hip. That is has a bunch of fused vertebrae in it. And on mammals, it looks totally different, but the way it looks on birds, it almost looks like it could be a skull. And sometimes it's more skull-like than this photo. That one could trick some people. It's actually the same one on different sides. But depending on how much of the sort of sternum or breastplate is on there, it can look quite a bit like a skull. So I'm just going to get a little bit of, while I have a sharp drawing tool, I'm noticing there's these cracks between the bone there, and there's also some holes that I want to try to get a little bit clear. So I think I'm going to do my underdrawing a little bit more precise before I skip straight to the gouache. And there's also definitely a geometric thing going on here, which I think is important to try to get that accurately. Noticing these are rounded and not angular the way I originally drew them. Coming back in, there's these processes or protrusions coming out there and there, wrap around, boom, boom, boom. Okay, that's good. So in this instance, I'm starting with a little bit more detailed of an underdrawing that you can see, and then now I'm going to go into some gouache. So with my gouache, I have some already wet and activated that has a mixture of white and yellow. I'm noticing a fair amount of yellow on this. So I'm going to start with that sort of mid-tone, even though this risks the possibility that it'll be very similar to the paper color. So I'm going to come in here and see, yep, it's almost the same as the paper. That was probably a mistake. I just dried my brush off a little bit. I'm going to spread it around and sort of hedge my bets. Not super excited about that value or that color, so I'm just going to sort of spread it around, clean my brush, and I'm going to decide to come in and might as well put in the highlights right now. So I'm noticing that bottom right part has a lot of white, and this part does too. So while that unfortunate color is drying, I'm going to start on these. All the little pointy things seem more weathered. A lot of times white is something that is more weathered. Most animals when they die, most things when they die, living things when they die, if they're left on the surface, they just get paler and paler, with maybe a few exceptions. But your eye sort of looks at things and automatically guesses that these white things are actually older. And I think these edge parts of this bone get more exposure, more weathering, so they fade out faster. Okay, so now I've got my strong whites, and now what I'll probably do is just put in my strong darks. So with my palette, I do have a little bit of this weird sort of purple mixture and black mixture, so I'm going to get some of that. And let's see if I can see these holes and stuff. Oh, these cracks need to be dark. So there's these cracks between the bones. That's important. I'm probably going to make a note of that as well, just to make sure I understand that those are cracks. Cracks, there's another term for that. It's like a seam. And then I'm going to do the holes as well. And then I'm going to try to fade out. This is something I would be able to do way better with watercolor, but I'm going to try to sort of fade out this slightly different brown color in here. Yeah, this would be, for me with my watercolor palette, this would be like a very easy task, but here it's going to be a lot trickier with gouache. But I'm basically trying to just get like a little transition there and a little transition here. There we go. One thing I could do is I could try to put some shadows underneath these bones to make them pop out more, but I think this is fine. I could come in with ink like I did on that one, but I think you get the idea that it's definitely possible, even just sort of muddling around with gouache, to get some diagrams that help you understand bones and see bones better. So gouache, put it on your wish list for Christmas. At the very least, if you're messing around with watercolor already, I would recommend just getting some white gouache and playing with that. If you use a watercolor palette that someone else makes, such as the John Muir Laws watercolor palette, you're going to need to buy gouache eventually to replace this here, and you can combine it with your other watercolors to pigment it, or you can just go and get some of the colors of Gulvian gouache like what I have here. For me, this was a case where the water brushes seemed like a limiting factor, and working out of my watercolor palette seemed like a limiting factor. So when I got this ceramic palette and started using traditional brushes with like a water thing and all of that, which is all very studio. Those are all things that limit you to the studio. When I started doing that, I do think that my gouache got a lot better. As you did see some of the examples that I showed with these bones here, I don't think this would have been as easy for me to do if I didn't have this mixing palette. Anyways, those are some tips for gouache and bones. Next time, maybe we'll try painting some type of weird alien bone like this. More episodes and updates coming soon. There could be some big changes coming for the Nature Journal show on my YouTube channel, so stay posted. All right, bye everyone. Thanks for joining in. Christine, James, Creative Arts with Hrithik, who were active in the chat there. See you next week. Bye. Unless the Nature Journal show ends. Dun dun dun. Bye.